Outside the bridge dome, the starfield was a crowded smear. Too many points to track, all of them warped by the math I was about to push us through. Inside, the consoles waited in their usual ring, green and gold traces suspended above the boards. Captain Orwell floated beside his chair with the harness straps looped loose in one hand, watching me instead of the displays. Navigator. I know. My palms hovered over the nav interface. Solution is stable as it gets out here. We hung at the edge of the Galactic core corridor, the farthest I had ever taken a ship. This place was charted more by legends than by real telemetry. The last jumps had stretched our tables thin. Every solution looked like patched cloth with more seam than fabric. Fleet Command wanted us to pin this region down. Find the civilization the old surveys hinted at. Make a map. Bring it home. I lived for maps. I trusted them more than people. If a coordinate was in my head and in the tables, it felt real, solid, something you could move toward. This corridor did not feel solid. Walk me through your error margins, Orwell said, loud enough for the others and the recorder. No solution keeps the jump field entirely inside the safe corridor. I touched the interface, letting the equations float up, bright and sharp. We can either risk a brush with uncharted mass on entry, or push the exit aperture toward a pocket with bad data. I chose the brush. You're steering us past something you can't see. Fleet Liaison Dunn floated opposite us, one hand on the rail. His uniform looked like it had never seen a vacuum drill or a hard burn. That's your preference. I prefer that to the pocket. I kept my eyes on the figures. The math on that region is thin in a way I don't like. Underdescribed. Orwell's brow creased. Underdescribed how? The base pattern is copied from older tables, I said. But the correction trail you normally see is almost empty. We have years of ship tracks near this corridor and hardly any incremental adjustments. It looks like everyone who flew through here glanced once and never really checked their work. Imran Basu, our chief xeno-analyst, leaned over from his science console. You think they made no notes because they found something and then lost interest? Or they lost something else, I muttered. Orwell's gaze sharpened. We're still inside fleet tolerance. Barely. I fixed on the projected target frame. Recommend we proceed before the corridor drift widens. He clicked his harness home. A few others followed. I didn't bother. If the solution failed, the harness would just make my corpse easier to catalogue. Take us in. Jump charge built, a rising tension through the hull. The bridge lights dipped as power rerouted into the coils. Every time there was a moment when I thought about the worlds behind us. Names, routes, old log entries, a web of places I'd memorized so thoroughly they felt like family. The farther you went from the familiar, the more you clung to that pattern in your head. The corridor engagement tone peaked. I engaged. The stars folded inward, and the world became the map. You never get used to that first instant. Space narrowed into a channel defined by numbers and past experience. The ship rode a gradient between what the engines wanted and what the corridor would allow. I watched the solution track, fingers shifting in tiny corrections. There. A tug on the entry flank, mass field stronger than predicted. The hull shuddered around us once, twice, like brushing something rough. Adjusting. My voice stayed low. Keeping us inside. Orwell gripped the rail. All board steady. The path tightened, then widened. We shot down a long slope of compressed distance, clean and sharp. Good math. On the exit side, the corridor opened like a fist loosening. 3, 2, 1, I counted under my breath, marking the edges of the map in my mind. Starlight snapped back. For a moment, the dome filled with glare and after images. The adaptive filters recovered and the view cleared. We had emerged above a world ringed with dark structures. No traffic flowed between them. No station halos glowed. No shuttles crossed the Terminator. No drive flares cut the night. No orbital markers winked. Just a belt of cold constructions and, below, a city of grey figures strewn across a continent like ash from a broken bowl. Orwell's harness strap drifted free from his fingers. "Where is everybody?" Imran pulled up external feeds. The main screen shifted to show the city. Streets, terraces, towers that leaned at angles that made my gut clench because the engineering sat just beyond my understanding. And everywhere, the shapes. At first I thought they were statues. Thousands of upright forms scattered along ways and plazas. Some prone, some half-turned. Each caught mid-motion. "Stop!" I flicked a hand. "Freeze that!" The image halted on a wide plaza with a broad transit platform. Dozens of figures stood locked in a moment. One reaching toward another's shoulder, another gesturing toward a hovering slab. Mouths open mid-syllable. They hadn't fallen into position. They had been walking, talking, working, and the instant had never advanced. Harry Evans hovered near the back of the bridge, junior nav harness tucked tight, wide eyes locked on the display. He had the raw data sense I'd burned half my life into training. He also had no practice hiding what it did to him. "This isn't orbital abandonment," he said quietly. "This is abandonment of time." Dunn folded his arms. "Or a civic installation. An artistic statement you don't know." "Look at the dust," Imran countered. "Layer on every surface, wind erosion on the buildings. These bodies have been standing still while the planet kept moving." He threw a sensor overlay across the image. Markers speckled it with age. The figures had weathered in place. Orwell pushed off the rail to float closer to my console. "Distance?" "Low orbit," I answered. "We can stabilize and drop a descent team within an hour." "We won't be the first to try that," Dunn said. "We know there was a civilization. We know multiple survey expeditions passed through this region. None of them reported this." "None of them reported much of anything." I zoomed the map out to the local volume. "That's what bothers me. The legend is loud. The details fade as soon as you get close. Fleet archives have almost no high-resolution data out here, mostly second-hand references." Orwell scanned the field again. "We're here now. Fleet wants an answer. We have a duty. Pick a landing zone, Tor." "Duty, right." I turned back to the map, dropping a frame around the plaza with the transit platform. Central, open, easy to secure. Plenty of bodies to examine. The thought rose quietly as I marked the vector. If no one remembered what this place had been, did landing change that? Did putting fresh eyes and new logs on it bring it back or push it further away? I pushed the thought aside. The map came first. Without it, we were metal drifting through nothing. "Landing coordinates plotted." I sent them to Orwell. "Recommend a 6-man team. Short EVA, minimal disturbance. Ship stays in high guard until we know the environmental factors." Orwell nodded once. "Prep the descent." We gathered in the shuttle an hour later. Orwell had stayed on the bridge. He told himself his place was with the ship. I suspected another motive. He wanted distance in case the surface did something sudden. Captains didn't admit that out loud. Core, our security chief, checked his harness seals with a habit that looked like prayer. 2 riflemen floated behind him, helmets under their arms. Imran clipped a sensor pack to his side. Harry waited beside me, thinner and more anxious than most juniors I'd worked with, but steady when his hands touched a console. Dunn arrived in full liaison gear, uniform immaculate, portable recorder maglocked to his wrist. "We keep this tight," Core reminded us. "In, out, clean perimeter. No wandering. Nobody handles anything without clearing it with me and Dr. Basu." "Statues don't fire back," Dunn muttered. Core didn't answer. He sealed the hatch, and the docking clamps released. The shuttle undocked and kicked toward the planet. Below us, the grey city spread across a broad plain, edges fading into a haze of smaller structures. Intricate, dense, full of stories. Every one of them paused mid-sentence. Our shuttle descended in a controlled arc. The transit platform rose to meet us, a wide ring with a low barrier around the edge. Bodies clustered across it and down the attached ramps. Any energy signatures? Core checked with Imran. Residual patterns only, Imran answered. Old. Infrastructure's cold. No active grid we can see from this height. We touched down with a soft jolt. The landing struts adjusted beneath us. The lock gate opened with a thin groan. We stepped out into silence that felt like a conversation paused mid-word. The nearest figure stood 2 arm lengths from the ramp. Humanoid but not human. Limbs slightly longer, fingers 3-jointed and elegant. Joints and spine shaped for a posture different from ours. The body leaned forward, one arm lifted chest height, hand open as if presenting something. Every detail looked precise. Skin texture, the fall of its garments, creases around the eyes. A faint roughness along the jaw where a human face might carry stubble. This face had no hair. The lines suggested some other pattern of growth. It looks carved, Harry whispered. But no one carves like this. Even with modern tools, this would take centuries. I circled carefully, suit telemetry linked to the others. The surface looked grown or fused, seamless and smooth. The expression caught me. The mouth hung open, teeth visible mid-word. The eyes focused on something beyond the raised hand. Confusion? Surprise? A question? Too precise to read easily. Imran crouched near the foot to sweep a sensor wand along its surface. Composite material, he reported. Dense. Structures consistent throughout. Body and clothing are one substance. Flash fossilization? Dunn asked. I don't have a mechanism for that, Imran said. I have hypotheses, none worth putting on record yet. Core gestured toward a cluster of bodies further along the platform. They're all like this. They were. Everyone we inspected was frozen in the middle of something ordinary, carrying containers, leaning against railings, halfway through a stride. Postures showed work, conversation, boredom. No shared expression of fear, no contortion of pain. Whatever happened ended their motion before they knew they needed to react. We moved off the platform, down a broad ramp into the plaza. Tiles stretched in intricate patterns, interrupted by low basins and arches. More figures clustered around a central structure, a hollow ring leaning on its side. This whole place is wrong, Harry murmured. It should have a layer of narrative. Even if we've never been here, the mind fills in noise, expectations. I'm not getting any of that. Focus on what you can measure, I told him. Route spacing, cardinal directions, elevations, keep it in coordinates. I took my own advice. I fixed anchoring markers in my head. Sun angle, ground slope, distance to the shuttle. As long as the map stayed clear, the world stayed real. That had always been true for me. We spread out to catalogue. My job was context. Link every tagged body to the city's structure, pin positions with precision, sync everything back to Osprey's nav grid. I picked a figure near the ring as my anchor. This one leaned with both hands on the railing around a basin, body pitched forward slightly, mouth set in a line of effort or concern. The shoulders hunched like someone pushing a point in an argument. Raised ridges traced along the forearms and the sides of the neck. Tattoos or functional implants. A complex pattern wrapped around and under the garments, vanishing where cloth covered them. I zoomed my visor on the pattern. It branched in tight curves, loops nested within loops, tiny variations repeating down the limbs. A route map shrunk to skin. Imran, I called. On me. He joined me and focused his scanner on the ridges. Embodied data, maybe, or ornament with meaning. I'll know more when we get a sample up top. Dunn stepped closer, recorder lifting. Describe what you see, navigator. For the log. Odd request. The image was right there. Our suits recorded everything. Fleet loved redundancy, so I gave it to him. The ridges run from the back of the hand up along the ulna, branching at the elbow into 3 paths. I traced the air. The central path climbs the forearm to the biceps. Then I stopped. The words and the visor feed no longer matched. The central path. No, hold on. I refocused. The ridges rise from the wrist and form triangular clusters. Each one connects to... Wrong again. The pattern no longer looked like triangles. Interlocking arcs now. I just used the word triangle. I had no idea where it came from. Imran glanced up. Problem? I'm misdescribing what I'm seeing. Annoyance pushed into my voice. The pattern's shifting in my head. Fatigue, Dunn suggested. You've been on shift a long time. Fatigue doesn't rewrite geometry. I tried again. Base ridges rise from wrist to elbow in parallel, then break into clusters. Each cluster continues to... The sentence frayed in my mouth. The more I tried to fix the pattern in language, the more it slid away. I snapped a set of stills through the visor and sent them to the team. Look at these. How would you describe those ridges? Imran's gaze tracked across his internal feed. Linear with periodic nodules in a quasi-logarithmic sequence. Dunn checked his recorder. Curved diamonds, overlapping, with a consistent gap between them. You're describing the same image, I pointed out. They're functionally similar, Imran replied. No, they're not. Try drawing it when we get back to the ship. I have a hypothesis. Imran gave me a long look. About what? That this place is wrong in more ways than time and weather. Back on Osprey, the figure lay on a float cradle in the main lab, clamped in a containment field. Under white working lights, it looked almost human despite the different proportions. Familiar problems from unfamiliar angles. The team gathered. Orwell was there now, face drawn, studying the figure with a commander's habit of focusing on what might kill his people first. Harry hovered near the foot of the cradle, fingers flexing. I handed him a stylus and a blank sheet from the analog pack I kept for myself. Draw the arm ridges, I told him. From memory. No peeking. He stared. From memory? I saw them an hour ago. Exactly. Draw what you remember. He mouthed a curse and bent over the sheet. The stylus scratched out triangles and straight segments up an arm outline. When he finished, I rotated the page toward Orwell and Imran. Match what you remember. Imran frowned. I recall curves, not straight lines. Orwell took the sheet, studied it, then shrugged. I didn't look that closely. Now look at the statue and draw again. Harry turned, eyes on the real ridges, and started a new sketch. His wrist moved in a different rhythm this time, tracing arcs and loops that interlocked like braided roots. The 2 drawings could have been from different subjects. He stared at them both, confusion tightening his face. That's strange. Let me try. I picked up a fresh sheet and drew from my own memory of the surface. Rectangles nested inside each other, each rotated slightly, stepped up an arm. Those don't match, Imran observed. They should at least approximate. I looked from the drawings to the ridges, then to the stills on the lab monitor. The images on the monitor didn't match any drawing precisely. Close in places, wrong in others. The more I studied them, the less certain I felt. Could be a cognitive effect from the material, Imran said. He ran a scanner beam along the ridges. Some interference with short-term visual processing. Then why does it only show up when we push it into words or lines? I asked. He considered. Language binds perception. Maybe the interference appears when we force the details into that structure. Dunn's recorder hovered. You want that in the report? The alien artifact confuses us when we talk about it? I want the truth in the report, I replied. The truth is we don't know yet. Orwell cut in. He fixed me with a steady look. Tor, you came up through the long routes. You've seen more interference than anyone else here. We have a civilization frozen in place and this distortion. How much danger are we in just by being here? Physical danger. I ran through routes, mass, distribution. Minimal for now, no sign of an active weapon system, environment standard. Conceptual danger. I hesitated. We're already inside it. How? Orwell's tone flattened. I've been watching the core corridor tables for years, I said. Closer in, everything's documented to death. Trade routes, relays, colonies. As we approach this region, the tables thinned. That's normal. What isn't normal is the missing correction history. Old expeditions come back with banner reports and no detailed supplements. The closer you get to this city, the fewer words we have. The data feels scraped. You think that's deliberate? Dunn frowned. Fleet suppressing data? If Fleet were hiding it, there'd be traces, gap flags, corruption tags, restricted access markers. There's none of that, just thin entries. Like the original teams never wrote it down. Imran chewed the inside of his cheek. You're suggesting the phenomenon extends beyond the frozen bodies, that it reaches into records, that it makes people refuse to describe it in detail. I'm suggesting that every time someone looks closely at this place and tries to fix it in language, something pushes back, I said. We landed. We brought a piece aboard. We just felt that push. Orwell studied the statue again. Fleet expects a full data package. They won't accept something pushes back as a conclusion. They may not get to accept anything if we handle this wrong, I answered. Dunn scowled. You're a navigator. Your job is plotting routes and keeping us on them. You're not qualified to declare an information hazard. I'm qualified to notice when my charts start fraying, I told him. And they've been fraying since we came out of that jump. Orwell raised a hand. The room quieted. We keep cataloguing. Dr. Basu, stay on the statue and planetary survey. Tor, back to Nav. Check the tables. Look for other inconsistencies. We'll send an initial report with limited detail until we understand the risk. Dunn's eyebrows climbed. Captain, that's my decision. Orwell didn't look at him. If Command wants to overrule it, they can do so when we're not parked over a frozen city full of unknowns. Dunn closed his recorder, displeasure contained. Advisory authority only went so far. For the moment. I headed back to the nav bay with Harry trailing. The corridors felt longer than usual, the angles slightly off. I told myself it was fatigue. I knew it wasn't. In the nav bay, I brought up our route map from the last relay out to here. Lines lit between systems in a branching web, brightness for traffic density, thickness for documentation depth. Near the old home sectors, the web burned solid with overlapping tracks, thick nodes at hubs and relays. Outward, the network thinned but stayed coherent. Around our current position, the web sagged. Lines drooped and faded like neglected wiring. Look at this, I told Harry. He leaned in, fingers catching the console frame. That's wrong. Be precise. He slid a hand through the projection, highlighting 3 corridors. Those lanes should be more distinct. I remember this sector from Academy. There were station names, reference relays, paths to the core. He zoomed in. Route names remained, but cross-references were sparse. Note fields were empty or filled with generic text. No personal log snippets, no incident reports, no revised coordinates. Run a correction history on corridor 41.03, I said. The console processed and returned a flat line. Initial registration date. Nothing else. That's impossible, Harry muttered. There must have been a dozen surveys since then. Try 41.04. Another flat line. I opened my analog notebook, flipping to where I'd copied this region as a practice exercise 2 years ago. I'd written every route by hand, embedding the map deeper into my memory. The page that should have held the core corridors was blank, not torn or scraped. Clean, untouched paper. Something wrong? Harry asked. I wrote these routes down 2 years ago, I said. They're gone. He took the book, checked the page, then looked up. You're sure you wrote them? I memorize maps. I remember the exercise. I remember the cramp in my hand. The page is empty. He flipped through the notebook. Old exercises remained, Notes from earlier tours, calculations, sketches of station layouts. Only the core region was missing. "Maybe you planned to copy them and never did," he offered. "Memory plays tricks." "It does," I agreed. "But it usually frays around the edges, not along a clean boundary." We stared at the blank page together. It stayed blank. "This is what I meant," I told him. "We're already inside it." We left the core behind next shift. I plotted a course toward a frontier relay with the best data we had. Corridor geometry still fit the models, but the context felt thin, like flying through a sketch. The jump went smoothly. As soon as we dropped out, I checked the tables again. More routes were gone, not flagged as erased, just skipped. Indices jumped past them. The map behaved as if those lines had never existed. I ran a diagnostic on nav architecture. No anomalies, checksums held. The system believed this was normal. Orwell floated in the hatchway of the nav bay while I worked. He watched the number streams. He didn't have to understand them. He knew patterns, and he trusted the people who lived in the details. "You look like you want to throw that console out the airlock," he observed. "I don't trust it. I trust my memory less right now." He folded his arms. "Show me." I walked him through the missing histories, thinning records, blank notebook pages. He listened without interrupting. "How many ships know about this?" he asked when I finished. "Anyone updating nav tables out here will feel something's off," I said. "Whether they see more than a glitch is another question. Humans are good at explaining away the strange if it lets them keep moving." "We're not explaining this away," he said. "Then we have a problem with fleet." I turned a display toward him, showing the queued transmissions. "Command wants an initial package on the core. Full sensor sweeps, logs, personal reports. They want the city inside out." "And you think doing that makes the phenomena worse?" Orwell guessed. "I think attention is a factor," I answered. "The only reason this place stayed underdescribed is that no one anchored it fully. Stories, rumors, a few images, then silence. If we build a complete coherent file and beam it back to 1 million readers, we may be feeding the same process that froze those people." Orwell rubbed his forehead. "We can't bring nothing back." "We can bring a limited packet." I tapped the buffer. "Coordinates, basic warning, key images, enough to mark this region hazardous. Then we hold detail until we understand how far this goes." "Command won't like that." He looked tired. "Dunn will already be drafting obstruction complaints." "If Command pushes, they can push later," I said, "when we're not inside its teeth." He studied me a moment. "All right, draft a limited packet. We'll send it at the next relay and hold the rest." I let out a slow breath. "Understood." As he left, Harry drifted in. Picked up something from archive traffic. He threw a file onto my display. A compressed message from a survey ship 3 sectors out. Half the content failed authentication and had been flagged. The rest was brief and frantic. An officer on that ship described a port station losing its identity during dock approach. The physical structure hung ahead of them. Tethers connected. People moved behind viewports. But every reference to the station name in their systems turned blank. External buoys dropped their identifiers. The crew began arguing over what the station had ever been called. The message cut off there. I stared at the clipped words. Raw panic bled through the formality. "We're not the only ones," Harry whispered. "Of course we're not." I scrolled to the header. The ship code looked familiar. I reached for the name attached to it. My mind slid over emptiness. "I know that vessel," I said slowly. "We crossed paths. I can't pull its name." Harry's face tightened. "Do you remember the crew?" "One of them bragged about a tight slingshot at Antares relay," I answered. "Glasses, a scar, I don't remember the name, that's wrong." We didn't argue with that. We tested the phenomenon on purpose next shift. I picked a minor system along our route. An uninhabited red dwarf with a brace of icy rocks, sometimes used for gravity assists and cold storage. The tables listed it with a single identifier and a few mass readings. No one loved it. No one lived there. If we're right, I told Harry and Imran in the quiet nav bay, we can at least see what draws this thing, not control it, but feel where it leans. That isn't much comfort, Imran replied. It's more than yesterday. The experiment was simple. Before the jump, we chose two features of the target system. One was the detailed structure of the third rock's orbital inclination. The other was the exact pattern of minor rubble in the outer belt. For the first, we drown it in description, I explained. Simulations, models, commentary. We share that among ourselves and with the archive. For the second, we barely touch it. One line, no diagrams. You're inviting the effect, Imran said. Yes. If we want to understand what it follows, we have to give it something to follow. We spent an hour talking the third rock to death. Harry spun models of its path, narrating each nuance with trainee zeal. Imran ran comparative analyses. I filled analog pages with the orbit's twists and periods, embedding them in ink and hand. For the rubble belt, we logged a rough density estimate and one offhand note in the system entry. No extra commentary. Then I plotted the jump. As we rode the corridor, I kept the third rock's orbit in my head. Mass, inclination, precession. I pictured it as clearly as I could. I let the rubble blur. We emerged into the system, rocks and a tired little star. Scan the third rock's orbit, I told Harry. He pulled it up, frowning. That's strange. What are you seeing? Flat inclination, he said. Circular path, no nodal precession, completely simple. Our initial tables and sims were more complex. Check the logs, I said. He accessed our pre-jump files. The simulations and notes we'd built were still there in outline but hollowed out. The entries contained only a bare reference. Orbit stable. Unremarkable. My analog pages now held a few vague lines and a clean gap where the rest should have been. I opened the rubble belt entry. Our single messy line sat unchanged. New scans showed a rich structure. Clumps, gaps, resonances. Imran floated between consoles, eyes tracking. It targeted the orbit we saturated with attention, he murmured, left the underdescribed belt alone. The more we tried to nail that orbit down, the more we painted a target on it, I said. Can we reverse that? Harry asked. Protect something by refusing to describe it. We can't shield it from physical danger that way, I replied. But we might keep it from being eaten by whatever rides attention. Imran tapped his scanner against his palm. What if this is what happened to the core civilization? They became the center of a galaxy's stories. Everyone believed in them, talked about them, mapped them. The more they shone, the more this thing converged. And stripped away everything that made them a story, I finished. Left matter without meaning. If that's right, we already made a very unwise move. Imran glanced toward the bulkheads. We jumped straight into the heart of it with a ship full of recorders and eager minds. We also cut a bright wake through jump space, I added. Space is thin along those corridors. We left a trail of attention behind us. If this thing rides that, our wake is a beacon. We floated in the nav bay, the quiet hum of systems around us, the weight of what we'd just proven settling in. What do we do? Harry asked finally. We choose what to feed it, I said. Or we let it choose for us. I'm not fond of the second option. It started small. I was building the duty roster when I saw the gap. The nav watch table listed my name, Harry's, and a blank. The system highlighted the empty slot as an error. We always had 3 navigators on rotation. I could picture the third man's face, hazy at the edges, short hair clipped close, quiet, competent, happy to take night watches, old rock ballads in his earphones. I couldn't think of his name. The personnel database listed 2 nav staff, me and Harry. The third entry field held a placeholder that should have been filled before we left dock. I checked ship logs. Duty rosters back to departure showed only 2 nav officers. No bunk assignments beyond ours. No mess records. No training sessions. Yet I remembered teaching someone the quirks of Osprey's jump coils in our second week. A nervous question about mass shadow interpolation at 1 in the morning. The memories hung in my head without anchors. I went down to the nav bunk room. 3 bunks stacked vertical. Mine in the middle, Harry's on top. The lower bunk was neatly made, blanket stretched tight. A glove sat on the pillow. Standard nav glove. Slightly smaller than mine. A name was inked on the inside cuff in a hurried hand. I read it once. Recognition flared, bright and sharp. It matched the forgotten face, training sessions, shared jokes over coffee, a clumsy fall on the bridge after a misjudged push. Then the name slid away. The letters blurred. My eyes tracked the shapes. My mind refused to give them sound. I grabbed the glove and took it to Harry. He looked at the ink. "It's smudged," he said after a moment. "Can't make it out." "It isn't smudged," I insisted. We had a 3rd nav officer. He slept in that bunk. "If someone were here, they'd be in the database," Harry protested, voice unsteady. "There's nothing." "That's the point." I held the glove out. "We had a man. The records don't." We went to Core. He checked security logs. Bridge video from the past weeks showed 2 navigators at the consoles, never 3. Nav bay cams matched. I knew they were wrong. "This is stress," Dunn argued later in the senior staff room. "The core, the frozen city, anomalies in the charts. You're seeing patterns." "The patterns are there," I said. "You just refuse to see what they mean. Whatever stripped the core's story is moving along our routes. It took someone from us. He's gone from shared record, but not from my head." Orwell watched me more than he watched the feeds. "Are you sure you remember him?" he asked quietly. "I can tell you how he took his tea," I replied. "I remember him asking if jump corridors ever get less frightening. I can't say his name." Silence settled over the table. Imran exhaled. "If the phenomenon can target individuals, this goes beyond roots and archives. It reaches people. Even if that's true, duty doesn't change. Fleet expects a complete report. We can't start hiding data because it frightens us." This isn't about fear. Heat rose in my chest. It's cause and effect. Every time we align more minds and records around something, we make it a brighter target. If we broadcast a detailed history of the core, we may hand an entire civilization's attention to this thing. Think about what that means for human space, for old Earth, for the hubs. "You can't know that," Dunn snapped. "I know what happened to those people," I answered. "I know what's happening to our charts. We lost a man and you can't even miss him because your memory's gone." Orwell cut in before it spiraled. "Enough. We're not solving this by tearing each other apart." He turned to me. "Recommendation, Navigator. Limit transmissions. Use low-density packets with coarse information only. No rich recordings, no synchronized narratives. Keep shared attention pointed away from the core as much as possible. When we send a warning, make it sparse, something people glance at and file away. You want to bury the most important discovery in fleet history in footnotes," Dunn muttered. "I want us to have a history to bury anything in," I replied. Orwell sat very still, weighing loads on a beam with nothing under his feet. "We'll send a limited packet at the next relay," he decided. "Coordinates, a warning that conceptual hazards are present, and a quarantine recommendation. Detailed data stays on board until we reach fleet and can present in person." "That's still dangerous," I warned. "So is doing nothing." He met my eyes. "Command won't leave the core unexplained. If we refuse to send anything, they'll send someone else with fewer scruples. At least this way, we set the tone." Dunn leaned back, displeasure clear. He knew better than to push further in front of everyone. We broke up. I went back to my maps, feeling like I was shoring a wall made of sand. The next directive came 3 jumps later. We reached a frontier relay. A sparse hub with a single ring, a few cargo tugs, one passenger bus waiting on a tether. Its main feed carried traffic from a dozen outlying sectors. Some of it looked wrong. Ships referring to destinations that no longer appeared on our charts. Convoy logs that stopped mid-sentence. News bursts from stations I knew existed but could no longer locate. Our outgoing packet sat in the queue, minimal and anemic. Coordinates, a warning tag, a brief description of frozen bodies. No statue, no discussion of erasure. Dunn hovered over the comms console as we linked to Fleet for orders. The directive filled a page on Orwell's display. "All right," he muttered, scanning. "Command acknowledges our preliminary report. They require immediate delivery of full sensor and mission logs on the core. They instruct us to return by the most direct documented route and prepare for in-person debrief. Deviation from protocols will be treated as dereliction." He looked up. "They want everything, now." "Of course they do," I replied. "This is good," Dunn said. "We share what we've learned. Fleet resources can help." "Fleet resources are half a galaxy away." I watched the relay's traffic arcs. "The thing eating our maps is already here." "Can we refuse?" Harry asked quietly. Orwell shook his head. "We can delay. Argue. We can't outright refuse without consequences." "Measured against what?" I asked. "Court-martial? Stripped rank? That matters if there's a fleet left to enforce it." Dunn's gaze sharpened. "You're approaching open insubordination, Tor." "I'm trying to keep the map from collapsing," I said. Orwell rubbed his temples. "Enough. We're walking this in steps. We'll comply with the directive and still try to protect people." He turned to me. "Course that follows the direct route, but keeps us out of the densest lanes. Use every tolerance you can find." "Understood." I turned back to my console. "And the data packet," he added. "Prepare the full logs for transmission. I'll review them. Flag anything you think absolutely cannot go." I opened the packet assembler. Terabytes of observation data streamed across the screen. Surface scans, lab readings, helmet feeds, audio. The statue's ridges glittered in multiple resolutions, stubborn and half-describable. The more I looked, the tighter my chest felt. Once we beamed this into the network, control ended. Anyone with clearance could call it up. Everyone would carry the same words and images in their heads. That uniformity was the danger. Shared stories, perfect alignment. I thought of the third rock's orbit, the erased nav officer, the frozen city. If we turned all of that into a polished account, we might be doing the same thing to ourselves. I closed the packet. Then I opened a fresh buffer. From the outside, it would look the same. Same headers, same checksums, different content. I stripped out detailed core recordings. In their place, I dropped procedural logs from a chain of abandoned frontier sectors, old survey data from regions no one had visited in decades. I rewired references so every mention of the core pointed to empty systems only cargo tugs cared about. I kept a thin thread of truth. Hazardous coordinates around the core, a few blurred images of the frozen city. Enough to sustain our quarantine warning. Not enough to set the place ablaze in the collective mind. Harry watched over my shoulder. "You're forging the official record," he whispered. "I'm revising it," I answered. "For safety. If they catch you, they'll have to remember I did it first," I said. He hesitated, then adjusted a metadata tag. "There. That looks like routine compression. No one will question it unless they already suspect something." "Do you?" "I suspect this is killing us slowly." He met my eyes. "If you dull its teeth, I'll back you." I sent the falsified packet to Orwell. He glanced through the opening pages, saw logs and data, and authorized transmission. We watched the status bar crawl as our silvered lie shot down the network, lighting up relays and nodes. It felt like pushing a friend in front of a car to save a crowd. The next weeks were a chain of jumps and fraying edges. The closer we came to human space, the worse the maps behaved. Routes misaligned with their historic headings. Waypoints gained or lost minor deviations. Sectors slipped from named space into bare coordinate sets. The ship's archive tried to compensate, interpolating gaps, smoothing inconsistencies. That invented context gave the phenomenon more to feed on. I leaned more on instinct and old habits than on displays. The map in my head, though damaged, still held textures the tables lacked. Messages from other ships grew fragmented. Reports of ports losing their names. Colonies whose founding histories shrank to a paragraph. Border disputes evaporating because territories no longer had clear outlines on official charts. We were watching a slow fire move through the structures that held our civilization together. Not hulls, but shared agreements about where things were and who lived there. It wasn't all this thing's work. That was the name Harry gave it one night in the nav bay, when we were too tired for formal language. It follows our jump wake, he murmured, eyes on the displays. Feeds where the field disturbs space and our attention converges. It's a wake both ways. The label stuck. The wake, plain, no mysticism, just a phenomenon with a habit. Imran refined the model. The wake didn't think or want in any animal sense. It reacted. In places where many minds held the same story and many records aligned, it dissolved the pattern. In places where information was thin, scattered, contradictory, it slid past. Our survival now depended on that scattering. Hubs and homeworlds, catalogued with obsessive care, had become the brightest targets. Our only defense was to make ourselves harder to know. The breaking point came 2 jumps from the densest lanes. We met in the archive deck, deep in the ship's spine. Racks of storage nodes lined the bay, humming with compressed data from decades of surveys. Adjustable rails let crew move between them in 3 dimensions, a grid of paths. Orwell, Imran, Harry, Core, Dunn and I floated between the units, handholds clipped, displays projected in front of us. We just watched another sweep of correction histories vanish. Entries collapsed into generic summaries. "It's getting faster," Imran said. "It used to take months for a heavily documented subject to thin. Now it can happen between jumps." "The denser the surrounding context, the more quickly it burns through," I answered. "We're dragging it toward human space like a torch." "So we cut away fuel," Core said. I turned to him. "We're standing in the fuel. This deck is nothing but fuel. Every word, every map, every log." He frowned. "We can purge some of it. That's what I brought you here to consider." Dunn stiffened. "You can't be serious." "We've seen that underdescribed things slip past its grasp more easily," I said. "If we reduce archive density, we may slow the wake. If we sever some crosslinks, we make the network less appetizing. We simplify the map." "Blunting its teeth," Imran said thoughtfully, "at the cost of precision." "Yes, it's triage. We can't save everything. Maybe we can save the core by letting some edges blur." "You're talking about sacrificing outer colonies. People out there rely on us to remember them. That's why we make the map." "We're losing them anyway," I replied. "Right now they vanish without anyone realizing they were there. If we choose, we at least decide which regions become ambiguous and which we hold." "Listen to yourself," Dunn snapped. "You're talking about deciding who exists in history. That isn't your role. It isn't any individual's role." "No," I agreed. "But someone will make that choice. Either an unthinking phenomenon or human beings trying to limit the damage. I prefer the latter." "You don't get to pick what humanity remembers," Dunn hissed. "I already did," I told him. "At the relay, I replaced our core packet." Orwell stared. "You what?" "I swapped our detailed core logs with frontier data," I said. "Redirected attention load away from the core. Command received something, but not what they think. You altered mission records and you admit it, Dunn said, voice gone flat. Yes, because I believed sending the truth would have fed the wake enough to accelerate its path straight to the hubs. Orwell closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have had to stop me, I replied. I'm telling you now, because we've reached the point where you either lock me up or accept that my approach has merit and formalize it. Kor shifted his grip on the rail, torn between duty and instinct. His knuckles went pale. We're wasting time, I said. Look at the nodes. The storage units around us were changing. Tags on indicator lights dropped away, replaced by generic labels. The wake was moving through our archives as we argued. Without any of us touching the controls, one rack's status light winked out. A cluster of files slipped to null entries. Metadata rearranged itself like a shuffled deck. This deck won't stay intact, Imran murmured. If we do nothing, the wake will eat the contents in whatever order it chooses. We choose the order, I insisted. We choose what to clip and what to keep. Orwell's gaze flicked from the nodes, to me, to Dunn, to Kor. He knew what this meant, stepping outside doctrine, into a space where every decision would live on in a scarred civilization, if it lived at all. Fine, he decided. We do it. Controlled purges, but we do it together. No more solo moves. Tor, you design the strategy. Dr. Basu, you help identify regions whose loss does the least damage. Kor, you keep the process secure. Dunn, you record everything. If we survive, Fleet will need context. If we don't, someone else may piece it together from your notes. Dunn looked like he'd been asked to document his own hanging. You're choosing treason. I'm choosing survival over neat extinction, Orwell replied. I moved to the main console. It felt like raising a knife over a map and drawing through borders that had stood for generations. We started with less inhabited corridors, fringe routes that had always been half rumor. We severed some links between them and the main hubs, turning continuous networks into chains of low-density nodes. We flagged certain outlying colonies as ambiguous, reducing their entries to faint lines. We stored as much detail as we could in local analog vaults, unindexed, in case someone needed it later. Each deletion hurt. Names I'd flown to, stations I'd docked at, hands I'd shaken, all reduced to thin notes. An outpost is believed to exist in this region, specific details unavailable. As we worked, the wake nibbled at other parts of the archives. It erased files we hadn't touched, right in front of us. A cluster of legal precedents, a set of migration records, a sequence of fleet communications that no longer carried enough weight to hold. Kor's patience snapped when entries from his early career vanished mid-scroll. That was my first deployment, he muttered, staring at the blank space. We lost 3 men on that patrol. I remember their names. No one else will once this is done. Write them down, I told him. On paper. Keep the page on you. The wake is slower with things that belong to one mind in one medium. It favors consensus. Is that proven? He asked. It fits what we've seen, I admitted. He took the stylus roughly and wrote. I looked away, giving him space. We'd purged 3 sectors when the wake struck the node holding whatever remained of our erased nav officer. The cluster blinked out, leaving an empty gap where a man's service history should have been. Kor flinched. What was that? Someone we lost, I said quietly. Before we understood the rules. The wake didn't care. That night cycle, Orwell called us back to the briefing room. We drifted around the table, strapped lightly against slow drift. The air felt scraped raw. I've been thinking ahead, Orwell began. Suppose we make it back to fleet space. Suppose our limited transmissions and archive purges slow the wake. Then what? We live in a world with damaged history, Imran said. We rebuild what we can, adapt. We also live in a world where the core still exists, Harry added. Physically, those bodies are still there. The wake already stripped their story, Why would it stop there? It may have reached saturation, Imran said. If its behavior scales with density, once the core civilization's narrative collapsed, there might not be enough ongoing attention to keep it engaged. That lasts until someone rediscovers it, I pointed out, or until Fleet digs up our partial warning and goes sniffing. Orwell watched me. You've been thinking ahead. Say it. I've been thinking about decoys, I admitted. About false stories. About ways to lure the wake away from human space by giving it abundant targets somewhere else. Imran's eyebrows lifted. Artificial high-density narrative clusters. Yes, we know it follows attention and aligned records. We know jump corridors carry that attention through folded space in concentrated ways. If we build bright flares of data around uninhabited regions and misdirect the wake toward them, we may draw off some of its focus. You want to lie to the universe, Dunn scoffed. I want to feed a predator stories that cost fewer lives, I answered. Orwell folded his hands. We don't have the infrastructure to build that kind of decoy network alone. We have enough to start, I said. There's a dead system 2 jumps off our path. Old industrial platforms, minimal presence, plenty of mass shadows. Close enough to reach, far enough that no one lives there now. We load its vicinity with navigation beacons broadcasting fabricated histories of rich sectors that never existed. Seed our archives with their stories, then quietly cut ties to real regions. The wake tastes high density around that system and follows. And you think that protects the inner hubs? Core asked. Not completely, I said. Nothing does at this point. But it might draw enough of the wake's attention to buy time. Think of it as diverting a flood into an empty basin. And when Fleet discovers you've stuffed the archives with invented sectors, Dunn asked. You keep treating old rules as if they still hold, I told him. Look outside. The rules are burning. The choice is between a lie that preserves most of what we have and a truth that helps erase us faster. Orwell stared at the table. If we do this, we change human space forever. We already are, I said. Every time we purge an archive, the only question is whether we do it by accident or intention. He looked up. Resolve sat beside dread in his eyes. All right, he decided. We go to your dead system. We build your decoys. Then we go home and face whatever Fleet chooses to do with us. You're condemning us to trials, Dunn murmured. Better that than frozen bodies, Orwell replied. The dead system hung ahead like a forgotten thought. A small, cool star with a pair of rocky planets and a scatter of mining platforms in standby orbit. No beacons, no traffic. I'd passed it once early in my career. A coordinate on a list. I'd skimmed past while thinking about a woman on a hub station and a bar tab I couldn't pay. Now it looked like the best grave we could dig for the truth. We dropped in on a trajectory that kept us clear of the old platform's shadows. The nav bay felt muffled. Everyone watched the displays as if they might bite. Field stable, I reported. We're threaded between station hulls. No collision risk. Begin deploying decoys, Orwell ordered. We'd built the network from spare beacons, modified survey buoys, and repurposed cargo pods. Each carried a transmitter and a storage bay of fabricated logs. Imran and I had spent the last shift inventing those histories, obscene and strangely exhilarating. We conjured sectors from nothing, chains of worlds with sketched cultures, minor disputes, shipping lanes. Enough detail to feel real to algorithms, vague enough not to hook onto living identities. Harry added fictional navigational hazards and corrections, weaving a ghost map that intersected the dead system at multiple points. He wrote routes just plausible enough that future navigators might glance at them and move on. We dropped the first buoy near the system's edge, its transponder lit, broadcasting a dense packet of lies into local space. Buoy 1 broadcasting, Harry reported. 2 followed, then 3. Each added another knot of attention, a radiant clump of story around a place no one cared about. As we deployed them, a subtle pressure gathered at the back of my thoughts, like awareness of a crowd behind me. The more buoys we activated, the stronger it grew. "Tor!" Orwell's voice came through the channel. "Anything in the jump field metrics." I checked. Local space showed faint residue from our own entry. Over that, threads of strained geometry led away along corridors we hadn't used, the wake's earlier movement. New strands began forming, converging toward the system. Our decoys were working. "It's coming," I said. "Slow. This isn't a quick phenomenon. But yes, the field's bending." "Finish deployment," Orwell said. "Then we leave." We released the final decoy near a rusted platform. Its panels still bore the logo of some forgotten corporation. I wondered if that mark still meant anything to anyone. As the buoy drifted into position, its transmitter engaged. The air in the nav bay seemed to ring. That's wrong, I thought. Space doesn't ring. That's my mind reaching for a metaphor. I let the feeling pass without pinning it down. If the wake disliked anything, it was tight agreement between perception and narrative. We burned out along a corridor that had always sat half-described, an ore route with minimal logging. The jump felt shaky, every slight variation amplified by damage to the maps, but the engines did their work. Behind us, in that dead system, the wake found new bait. The final jump toward the primary relay was the hardest of my life. The map in front of me looked like a scarred body. Swathes of labeled routes had thinned or vanished. Some sectors appeared only as coordinates. Corridors near the inner hubs writhed with interpolated paths as the nav architecture tried to invent replacements. "We can't trust those suggestions," I told Harry. "No matter how convincing, they're guesses. Without them, we barely have anything left," he answered. "We have memory," I said. "Ours." He gave a small, bitter smile. "Mine isn't what it used to be." "Neither is mine," I admitted. "We use what remains." Orwell floated near the hatch, Core and Dunn behind him. They watched us work. The relay's distant gravity tugged at projections. "The direct route in is badly damaged," I reported. "I can still plot it, but there are gaps. We either thread through on raw instinct or break the path into smaller pieces and come in from odd angles. The second is slower, but it might confuse things." "Time matters," Dunn said. "The wake's heading for us. We need to reach Fleet before it hits the hubs." "We won't outrun it in a straight line," I answered. "We might muddy the trail if we break its expectations." "That's a story you're telling yourself," Dunn replied. "So is everything you believe about Fleet fixing this," I said. Orwell cut in. "Keep this practical." He focused on me. "You mentioned one more step when we talked about decoys. Something about altering central routes." "We can do more than purge archives," I said. "We can change the map future generations learn. Turn sharp routes into blurred ones, rename corridors, cut critical crossings. If the wake feeds on clarity held in common, we can soften that clarity, especially around old Earth and the big hubs. They've always been the brightest nodes." "You want to make the hubs harder to reach," Core said. "Yes, especially old Earth. Every cadet grows up tracing one primary path to it. We can break that path." "You're talking about changing the idea of home," Harry murmured. "Home lives in the map," I answered. "We change the map, we change home. That may be the only way to keep any of it." Dunn pushed off the bulkhead. "I won't allow this." Core moved without thinking, slipping between Dunn and my console. His hand settled close to his sidearm, steady. "You won't shoot a liaison on Nav," Dunn snarled. "That depends on whether you try to stop him by force," Core replied. Orwell's voice stayed quiet. "Everyone stand down." He looked at me. "Once we alter the central map and transmit it, it propagates. Children will grow up with a different pattern than we did. Are you ready to carry that?" "I'm already carrying a graveyard system full of lies," I said. and the absence of a man whose name I can't say. Another weight doesn't change the scale. What matters is whether those children have a civilization to live in. He held my gaze. Do it. I turned back to the console, hands trembling. I anchored myself by listing parts of human space I knew intimately. My childhood habitat, the asteroid run I flew when I was young and scared, the first hub where I drank with crew from a dozen polities. Each had coordinates, route chains, archive tags. I started with home. The habitat where I grew up sat on a minor branch off a mid-level corridor. It was well documented because it lay on a crossroads. Traders passed daily. Fleet patrols stopped for inspections. It glowed on the map like a cluster of lanterns. I pulled up its entry. Founding charter, population curves, names of founders, all the words that made the place feel rooted. I stripped it down. In the official nav tables, I left a single line. Orbital habitat present in region, serves as minor logistics node. I rerouted its primary access through a lesser-used corridor, marked that route as prone to anomalies, and cut several cross-references tying it to the core. Something twisted in my chest. I ignored it. Next, Old Earth's primary route. Not the many indirect chains through stations and transfers, but the central artery every cadet traced. The path you show children when you teach where humanity came from. I broke that artery. I inserted discontinuities, flagged segments as unreliable, pared back the language that painted Old Earth as the center of everything. I left coordinates and basic descriptions. I removed the myth of the straight line. New navigators will curse you, Harry whispered, watching changes propagate. They'll never know what the old map looked like, I replied. I moved on. Major hubs, key relays. I left their physical positions intact. I thinned the certainty of their stories. While I worked, Imran monitored jump field metrics. The Wake's threads thinned slightly along the direct paths to the hubs. Lines leading toward our graveyard decoy system brightened. It's working, he said. Dunn lunged toward my console. Core reacted, catching his arm and spinning him into the bulkhead. He locked Dunn's wrists. It wasn't elegant. It was enough. You're destroying the record, Dunn spat, struggling against the hold. You're monsters. History will judge you. History will have fewer words, I answered without looking away from the map. But it will still exist. That's more than the core had. We held Dunn there until the crucial edits finished. Once the changes cascaded through Osprey's systems, they would ride any sync we did at the relay. Erasing them would mean rebuilding the map from scratch. Workfleet didn't have time for even in peace. When I finally sat back, my hands ached. The nav field looked unfamiliar, like waking in a town where someone had shifted every street half a meter. Course plotted, I reported. Broken path to the relay. We'll arrive with enough fuel margin for contingencies. That's as much as I can promise. Orwell nodded. Do it. We engaged the jump. The corridor that formed around us felt unstable, not physically, but conceptually. Space stretched and folded to match the math, yet possibilities shimmered at the edges, like half-remembered alternatives. I rode it carefully, adjusting microvectors on instinct honed over decades. Harry backed me, hands steady despite the strain in his face. The Wake's pressure throbbed at the edges of my awareness, focused more along the paths we'd baited. As we neared the exit, the map in my head shuddered. Each meter burned behind us changed something. Routes vanished. Hubs slid sideways in the conceptual mesh. We dragged the skein of reality through a new loom. We dropped out near the relay. It hung there, solid, rings and spokes in place. Traffic lanes braided around it. Ships moved in approach and departure arcs. The hub's beacons broadcast identifiers that matched our altered tables. Dizziness washed over me. The relay was the same. The path to it was new. The story wrapped around it had changed. We had successfully altered what this place meant. Docking formalities took hours. Comms lag, safety checks, bureaucratic rituals. While we waited, Dunn stayed under guard in his quarters, not because he was violent, but because he was one message away from making everything worse. Orwell and I watched the relay's main data stream from the bridge as our systems synced. The Central Fleet Archive accepted our map updates. Our patched network flowed into their nodes, overwriting older versions already scarred by the wake. "Once this finishes, our map becomes baseline," I murmured. "Every ship that docks here takes it aboard. And every ship that leaves carries it outward," Orwell said. We'd given humanity a crippled map and called it correct. There was no triumph in it, only a steady awareness of cost. Comms pinged with a priority link from fleet headquarters. A familiar crest rotated on the screen. Orwell glanced at me, then opened the channel. An admiral's face appeared, older, lined, eyes sharp. He greeted Orwell, commended our arrival, requested a full debrief on the core mission and anomalies. "We'll comply," Orwell said, "but you need to know, the map you just accepted from us has been triaged." He paused, choosing. I shook my head slightly. Telling the whole story over live comms would only focus more attention. "The wake has damaged our archives and routes," Orwell continued. "We performed emergency edits to keep navigation functional. You'll see differences. Those changes were intentional. We can explain in person when we reach Central." The Admiral's expression tightened. "You altered fleet archives without authorization." "We did," Orwell replied, "because we believed the alternative was worse. I accept full responsibility." The Admiral studied him. "We'll discuss this further upon your arrival. For now, bring your ship and whatever data you have home. Fleet needs every intact example." The channel cut. Orwell floated in place for a long moment. "They treated that as a procedural issue," he said. "They already lacked the context to see the scope," I replied. "The wake ate enough of their background that our crime looks smaller than it is." I expected relief. I felt only tired. We offloaded most detailed core data into sealed containers for physical transport. Fleet wanted to study the city with their own teams. Fair. Dangerous. I made sure they received only one full resolution image of the statue's ridges. The rest I pulled from active storage and buried in a nested analog cache that required both my hand and Harry's to unlock. If I could have dropped the statue itself into the dead system, I would have. Orwell vetoed that. Fleet wanted the body. Refusing carried a political cost we couldn't pay. So I watched them haul the grey figure out of our lab into a relay bay, its frozen expression unchanged. The wake's pressure around the relay felt lower, muted. Our decoys were drawing heat. That didn't mean the relay was safe. It meant the fire had more than one place to burn. Dunn, once released, filed his reports. He accused me of falsifying records, accused Orwell of collusion, accused all of us of crimes against Fleet and against history. Investigators interviewed us over the next days as we waited for transport inward. They cross-checked statements against archives that no longer held all the traces of what we'd done. Our guilt became difficult to prove in detail because the context had shifted. In the end, they suspended judgment. We were confined to limited quarters, under observation, not a cell. Fleet had larger problems. I spent those days watching relay traffic. Ships came and went, carrying our bent map outward. Humanity would adapt. People would grumble when routes they remembered felt wrong. Merchants would find new paths. Colonies would discover that the world they'd called center now sat off to one side. The wake would follow the brightest stories and find our graveyard of lies waiting. Half a year later, on a small station 3 hops from the relay, Fleet had seconded me to a quiet posting, under watch but not behind bars. Useful, dangerous, uncertain where to file me. So they put me on a low-priority route, mapping corridor drift far from the hubs. Under my bunk I kept a sealed metal tube. No network links, no interface ports, just paper, ink and my hand. Inside, I kept a chart with 2 maps. The first was the one everyone used now. The wounded network, softened hubs, vague outlines, practical, survivable, limited. The second was a ghost overlay. Faint lines sketched corridors that no longer existed in any official table. The path to the core. The old route to my childhood habitat before I cut it. The erased port whose name I couldn't recall. The location of the dead system where our decoys broadcast untrue histories into a space thick with an unseen presence. I didn't look at the chart often. Once every few months, when the station's rotation lined up with a quiet shift and the need to remember grew sharp. Each time, I unsealed the tube, unrolled the paper, and traced the ghost lines with a fingertip. I whispered the names of places that still came easily and left pauses where names should have been but weren't. I wondered how long my own memory would hold, whether the wake would eventually seep even into this isolated sheet, whether the lines would fade despite how carefully I drew them. That risk was the price of keeping them at all. I told no one about the chart. Harry was somewhere out there, on another ship, living with his own scars. Core trained security staff now, teaching them how to hold a line when the threat was a hole in the world's story. Imran lectured fleet committees about conceptual phenomena, watching his theories become protocols. Last I heard, Dunn still argued that what we'd done was unforgivable. I didn't disagree. Unforgivable and necessary were not opposites. The wake lived on beyond any of us. In the decoy system, in the gaps of our maps, in the legends that would grow about ships lost on routes that no longer appeared in the tables. It wouldn't become domesticated or solved. It would remain something we built our lives around,